All right. So this show, like I said earlier, had the amazing Amanda. She already joined.
Thank you.
We already established that. Uh,
Yes, I am amazing.
and we also have a video that Steph's going to give of our special guest that's coming on next week.
Yeah.
Um, and it
Our very
looks,
next episode is next week Thursday. It will
yes.
be July 20th. We will be I
What?
won't say debating, but we're having a conversation with our good friend Mike Termott. He is Libertarian Presidential Candidate.
Oh,
He's
wow. Okay.
affiliated with the Mises Caucus. He's I don't know if he identifies as an anarcho-capitalist, but he's definitely very libertarian, and he's been making his rounds on all the talk shows recently. A lot of shows way bigger than us. So this is a segment from Kyle Kulinski's show, which has a million subscribers, so a lot bigger than us, and they had him on the show. So we're going to react to that.
Yeah. So we're going to play. How long stuff? Is it 5 or 10 minutes?
The video posted I'm about to click on is 14 minutes, but we don't have to watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
We can just watch.
Let's do it. Yeah. Find a
We'll
good
just
point
watch
to cut
it
it off.
as we feel like, you know.
All right. Cool.
And we're going to act live time. All right, is it show? You guys see my screen?
I see 3 of us, and I see a black screen.
Oh, there we go. You don't
Oh,
see
yeah.
my screen?
There you go.
I see
Yep,
it now.
I do now.
Libertarian Presidential Candidate.
That's it.
There it is.
I'm going to press. That's our man.
Said that you want to get government out of corporate America. There are parts of it I agree with, but to me that seems like the total opposite direction to go in. And I'm not for regulation's sake, but I think with this whole submersible down to the Titanic situation, you had a pretty clear example of where you could have really used some additional regulation requiring the submersible to meet basic standards of safety, and you very well would not have lost the lives on board. And this doesn't seem like a problem that the free market would just fix with perfect information. Granted, now I think there are going to be a lot fewer people going on submersibles onto the Titanic, but at a grave cost to those people's lives and their families.
I would disagree with that. At a fundamental level as well as at a practical level, I don't believe it's an example where regulation would help. What the experts have said is stupid is as stupid does. I believe that is true. There were plenty of people who knew that there were problems with that submersible, and I don't want to get into technical details because a lot has yet to be revealed about the situation. But I frankly don't see a reason why you would not believe that greater information would not come out and that markets would not correct this situation. I think that it's very likely that we will be going in the right direction.
Well, people had to die to give us that information, right? Like the submersible community, was being badgered by experts in the industry who were basically saying, look, you're not up to our standards and there's going to be a disaster here. And in fact, the CEO fired somebody who he hired, brought on for safety reasons. The guy released a report and was like, listen, man, this thing is not safe to go below 1,000 meters. And of course, the Titanic's 4,000 meters down. And he fired the person on the spot as soon as he released the report. So
if you guys want to comment on anything, just start talking. I'll pause it right away so we can react live time.
Sure. So that's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point to stop.
I guess so.
I don't know what he mean that regulation that wouldn't help. I mean, from my understanding of the Titanic, it's pretty evident that they knew they shouldn't have gone down there. And based on the technology, based on, like he's just saying that his facts were saying that they had a report saying it was unsafe. And I believe that if it was regulated, that it would have prevented him from going down. And I'm not sure,
or at least they would take different precautions to go down there.
Yeah,
much safer.
I don't know. Yeah, I was a little confused how you used a free market analysis to say that if we had a free market, that
it's just analysis of everything, though.
Yeah, if we had a free market, that this issue wouldn't have happened. I think one doesn't go without the other. One is an economic policy, another is a safety policy. So it's kind of confusing the issue, and that's what my assessment so far. Amanda?
Well, two thoughts on this. One, We know this. We know the saying: just because you can doesn't mean you should. In this case, they were being told not only can you not, you should not. But my other thought is, okay, we're talking about people who have more money than oh,
Entire
obvious,
countries.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
They're not. Of course, they're being told no, 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 but they still did it anyway, and that sort of that really represents what is wrong with so many different parts of the world where we have all of this we have all of this accumulated wealth that's being kept in as so many people the horrors I've seen, especially in the last 3 years, if we'd taken if they've it not taken, I don't want to say that, if more of this accumulated wealth had been redistributed somewhere else, how many lives could we have saved? We could have stopped this pandemic a long time ago. We chose not to. They chose not to do anything. It makes me sick. I'm tired of counting dead friends. And a lot of it is because they couldn't afford to stay alive. And that so when we're talking about, well, they went down in a tin can, um, wow. Just wow.
Seth, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think the most applicable thing is what you said is like he's just using free market lens to like see everything, every single issue, and somewhere like it's pretty obvious that small things could help, but like you're so like dogmatic and principled about like the government, if any sort of authority figure intervenes in any sort of way to prevent death, like it's against my principles, even if like there's bad consequences. So they don't really care about the consequences. I'm a consequentialist. I think the consequences of the actions are a lot more important than like the values you take and the means you take necessarily. Like if you have great intentions and people end up dying, like you obviously missed something. So I think we'll get a lot better picture of what the kind of things he views. Let's start that back up again. That was only like 2 minutes, so
yeah.
Since I get it that libertarians are skeptical of regulation from the government on industry, but don't like the specifics matter? Aren't there some regulations which are just obviously rational and then others that are not? And the ones that are not good we get rid of, but the ones that we need, it makes sense to keep.
Or you're conflating the word regulation with government. I think that may be where you and I part ways. Yes, an outside force, an outside view, an outside source of information, a third party, whether that comes from an insurance company or outside experts, can be enormously influential and enormously helpful. We have plenty of examples down through the generations of organizations that get together either pooled in an industry or through their requirements to have insurance involved and have flaws brought to light, problems brought to light that don't require the government to do so. This is an enormous tragedy. There's no question about that. I don't think there's a counter argument.
He's talking about there's a government here, that regulation is not connected with government. That's a flawed argument. When you really think about regulation, you have to understand that all regulations all come from industry. Government obviously are not experts in the industries that they're in. They come from groups of people coming together in that industry and recommending a set of guidelines for the government to enact as law so that the industry is safe. So his whole issue of that regulation, it's not government, it's a flawed argument. So that's going to be
it's not all top down. Like there's a lot of consensus and like a democratic decision making process that has to happen before we make any sort of regulation, and it's really more for like the people who would not otherwise follow through with something logical. You know what I mean? That people would cut corners that would cause problems. Like these are the people that need regulations.
But here's the thing: regulation. If we use that same logic, then when Teddy Roosevelt created the platform that regulates businesses, because businesses were regulating themselves, what they were doing in their regulation of themselves is they're price gouging.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is the consumers end up paying a lot more money because the government wasn't involved.
Yeah.
And Teddy Roosevelt's biggest, and kind of made him more Democrat than Republican, biggest issue was to break up the actual antitrust that these companies were actually doing. And that was the whole reason why we got the reforms that we did in the antitrust laws. And so this whole logic that he's peddling is essentially flawed, because if we allow companies and industries to regulate themselves without government supervision, then you get price gouging.
Yeah.
Regulation
or collusion, and where
yes,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think we need to remember that regulation isn't so much about making sure they stay small. It's about equity, making sure that the masses who don't have a voice, who aren't at the table, that they have that they're being protected too. We think about like the jungle, Upton Sinclair, like all of that whole movement of, hey, we need to watch out for every single person, not it's not so much about reining them in. And it's sort of like I guess it's sort of a law of nature. When things get too big, they tend to collapse. Yeah. It has very real consequences for people who never have a voice. And I think it's really incumbent on anyone who does have a seat at the table to make sure that we're watching out for those people as well. I'm sitting here watching storms out here, thinking of the billowing clouds, like they get up to 40, 50,000 feet. But we had a storm that moved through last week. It was big and scary looking, but it moved so quickly that it dissipated before it did anything. And it's just sort of a metaphor for, I don't know, when these big things fail. It's not just that billionaires fail; they're going to be all right. Trust me,
Yeah.
unless they wind up in jail and then whatever. It's all these people who were left behind in the debris. Oh my God, it should not happen.
Yeah, and the key flaw with like right-wing libertarianism is that they are protecting a certain level of freedom, but that freedom is a freedom that's already only accessible to really powerful people. And the people, like the right to be an employer is not as important of a right to not be exploited by a powerful force that's already manipulating, controlling society privately. Like private corporations can control government, private corporations can control your private life. Like authoritarianism needs to be across the board, not just like so narrowly focused on certain regulations non-existing. Like a regulation that prevents authoritarianism would be one that advances liberty. You know what I mean? Regulation just sounds like a word that just evokes a certain amount of emotion that makes you feel like it's authoritarian, when it's really about the consequences, like I said, of the policy. Which obviously, I'm not saying we can have like a totalitarian government that just like a benevolent dictatorship, like it does have the means to change, but it's more about like weighing which is more important than the actual results of your policies. I don't want to use any sort of means possible to install my worldview, but it's not as important as the actual results.
Yeah, and I think just sort of before we move on, I think we also need to be mindful of a wolf in sheep's clothing, where we're giving you autonomy. Here's this gig job. Well, guess what? It's the gig economy is so exploitative, but our entire economy is built on the backs of gig workers who have zero protections. And I was out working 80, 90 hours a week. I still wasn't making ends meet. That has to change.
Yeah, freedom from is not always not the only problem. There's always there's always the right of freedom too. You should be free to pursue what you want to do with your life. Not if you're deserted if you're alone on a desert island, you're technically free. Like nobody's gonna mess with your business. You run everything. Nobody's controlling any decision in your life. You have freedom to do whatever you want. But in about a week, you're probably gonna die.
No, I've actually done that.
You've been on desert island?
I did an archaeology project in Fiji in 2009. Yeah. little bitty. There were some other people on this island, but
Oh, not
no
quite deserted,
electricity, no
but
running. Yeah, but there was one a little bit over. I actually, now that I know what to do out there, I'd have been okay for a while. So
yeah.
would have died happy.
Well, now you're making the opposite argument I was making, but
I
whatever.
know. Yeah, that's okay. You're
It's
good.
okay. All right, we'll play a little bit more, then we can pause again.
To how disappointed we are and how badly we feel for the individuals who lost their lives and the enormous tragedy that it represents for the families, as well as, less importantly, perhaps, the people that believed in this project, and the people that wanted there to be further exploration in this area to go forward. So there's plenty of disappointment to go around. I hope that no one thinks that, we're trying to, either you or I are trying to mount some sort of an argument that says, too bad, so sad, this doesn't matter. That's not at all where I think that this conversation should be going. The issue really is, should people be allowed to make decisions for themselves? And should the government have not only the authority to say, here's what's going on, here's the information you need, but to shut down by force, to shut down individuals' rights to pursue something that is enormously risky. This is not, making sure that something you plug into the wall every day works well, right? This is a very unusual circumstance. Of all the things that we regulate in the world, I'm not sure why we're picking this.
Well, because a bunch of people just died. That's why.
It's a clear example.
It's a clear example. Like here, let me ask you this. I'll give you another example. Like, what is authoritarian versus what is just a basic regulation? So, like seatbelts, for example, are they authoritarian or is it just a basic regulation where people should be required by law to wear their seatbelt?
Oh, well, it's definitionally authoritarian. What you and I are talking about is whether or not that's a good idea. I don't think there's a counter argument that says it's not authoritarian. What we're saying is the government has assumed to itself the authority to make decisions for you, whether you think they're good or bad. I personally think it's a good idea to wear a seatbelt, but there are other people who don't, I suppose. But the government assumes to itself the authority to make that decision for you. So it's definitionally authoritarian. What we're just discussing is to be seen.
Yeah, I was about to pause too.
Wait,
I
so
think it makes a little bit of sense to say like an adult should be able to wear a seatbelt or should not have to, but like there should obviously be laws about whether or not you put a child in a seatbelt, because that's you making a decision for somebody else or putting them at risk when they don't have a certain amount of agency. A child should obviously be forced to be in a seatbelt in a car. That's something he's sort of moving right past. What were you gonna say?
my issue with the statement is just it doesn't make sense to why are you running for president.
Yeah, it is kind of funny because libertarians, anarchists like justice are be like, don't mess with electoral politics because it's not an avenue for change, and government this and that can't really. But libertarians are trying to like seize the state to abolish the state. It's kind of goofy.
Yeah, because logically, in his logic, he's saying that he doesn't believe in authoritarian government, but he's running for a highest office that requires an authoritarian mindset and framework to enact laws.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a contradiction that you run for the highest office in the land and believe in its principles.
And he's also a former police officer, which is literally.
Wait.
Yeah, he's literally. Yeah, he's a former police officer, and they're literally like the most clear form of like government that exists. They're like the arm of the state. They have the monopoly on violence. They enact laws. It's kind of a very clear-cut form of authoritarianism. If you're this kind of libertarian, like it's kind of hypocritical to enforce the state's laws when opposing state laws.
Yeah, exactly. What were you gonna say, Amanda?
No, I just no, I'm sort of absorbing all of this. Yeah, they're really focused in on this tin can under the sea thing when aren't there other issues? Like I
Yeah,
I
we
could
might
think of
skip ahead.
better focuses or better foci than several rogue billionaires under the
cat
sea.
allergies.
Oh no. We've got
Cats.
oh my gosh, all I can think is lawyer
I
cat
think they were,
now. I'm not a cat.
yeah, I think they were just trying to draw like certain obvious
Yeah.
examples to make them like you have to concede at least seatbelts, right? This and that.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna skip ahead to it says deregulation. That's a little bit more important than
Yeah.
seatbelts.
Okay.
So we'll see what he has to say about that. Although I'm sure it'll all be in line with his line of thinking so far.
Yeah.
Result of that corruption was deregulation, right? So the corruption led to the preferred policy outcome. So forget for you.
that's not
So forget
correct.
how it got there. Do you support the deregulation of the building codes?
I support the idea that industry can put into effect a regulatory structure as effectively as the government. Would you agree that the government, having done it, did not protect the people in Turkey?
Well, the only reason why it didn't protect them is because it wasn't enforced. If they enforced the building codes, then we would have been better off, no?
Were it not for a corrupt system, those people might have been more safe. I think that we can
Because the
certainly,
building codes are good. That's the point, right?
I appreciate why you want to use the word code, but
Call whatever you want. Authoritarian building codes. I'd still support it. You can call whatever you want. At the end of the day, more people do building codes.
Let's stick to regulation. Do industries have an interest in coming together, forming some regulatory body of work that they agree to live by, and have some outside inspection by an insurance company, for example, in order to warrant that the work has been done to regulation, to standard,
Oftentimes,
in
no.
order for people to believe that it's safe? I think that's a good structure. I don't see any argument why that has to be done at the governmental level. Corruption is corruption.
Well, because the industry has one goal, and that's to make money, and predominantly to make as much money in the short term as possible. Society may have other goals, like the buildings withstanding an earthquake, or people having health
which is
insurance,
why we
or
agree that
effective
some regulatory
healthcare.
infrastructure
So,
might make sense.
hold on a second.
So he's not opposed to regulations of business. He just doesn't think that the government should do it. That doesn't really make any sense. Like
Who's gonna do it then?
well, they think like the free market is going to form like some, even if regulated privately, they're still creating rules. You know what I mean? Like, are you opposed to rules, or are you opposed to the means to create the rules? It doesn't make any sense because rules are rules.
It really doesn't. Clearly, the industry regulated. How's that working out? It's not. It is just not. It is profit.
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
not. Go ahead.
Go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead. I didn't have a great point.
I was just gonna say. I mean, his idea has been tried before. I mean, he's not.
Yeah, where do you think we came from?
Yeah, like the government wasn't involved in business at all.
Yeah.
For a long time in America, and what happened was price gouging happened. People were paying way too much money for their services, and when regulation came involved, prices decreased in every industry that government was able to pass some form of regulation. So this idea of, well, let's not let the government is not efficient in creating rules. Well, like I said earlier, the rules are recommended by industry.
Yeah.
No politician.
Kind of what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, no politician I've ever seen. Well, the ones I know are not experts. You know, they're people who love their country and wants to.
They're rhetoricians. They're good at uniting people. They're not really like educated in every single field.
They give recommendations to industries. They say, hey, this is our industry. This is what we think helps. And us as politicians are supposed to be there to have a rail guard for the society price, what she was talking about. And when both of those sides intersect, then that's how we create policy. So his idea of saying, well, no regulation is necessary, it's farce, because at the end of the day, if we didn't have regulations, there would be no speed limits. There will be no guardrails on the side of the road.
Look at
There would be no accountability.
I was gonna say, look at the manufacturing of buildings before, like OSHA. You see pictures
Yeah.
all the times of people eating their lunch on look how many workplace deaths have existed in the late 1890s and the early 1900s. Like the amount of people that died in coal mines, and these corporations are not looking out for the worker.
They will not. They will not.
They will not. It intersects, or it intervenes with their profits. You know what I mean? They're willing to take risks, to risk losing the lives of their workers if it's unlikely they're all gonna die anyways. Like,
No, and guess what? They did.
Yeah, many people die, especially globally still, because of a lack of regulation. It's not like regulation inherently. It's the capitalist system which requires regulation because it's incentivizing people to cut corners because of the profit motive. Like there's certain ways in which it can be more amenable to cooperation, and that we could reduce regulation if we didn't have this just gruesome profit motive that does not care about the lives of their workers. Like they will just hire new workers, you know?
Well, and I think just sort of to take a step back and look at the whole picture here, the concept of government, specifically this government, is citizen representation. It's not, we have all of these differing opinions, differing experiences. I don't expect Emmanuel Cleaver to be an expert in archaeology or COVID. I expect him to listen to his constituents or the people who are, and to take all of these things into consideration, and then to go vote accordingly as to what he's hearing from us.
Yeah, exactly how government works.
Yeah, it's supposed to, but we've also got Josh Hawley, and he's gonna run in all the wrong ways.
Here, I'll play it so we can get a little bit more to talk about.
So that's why these things, many of them, it makes sense to be done at the governmental level, where you have the input of citizenry on societal goals that may be separate and apart from the profit motive. So, I think we have many examples of industries when, left to their own, they cut corners, they don't take safety seriously, they do everything they can to exploit workers, or, as we've seen recently, to jack up prices and price gouge using the excuse of inflation. We see the way that banks manipulated people and deceived them into getting into
issues there. Why don't we unpack those?
Well, hold on. Let me just finish. I mean, we've seen the way that banks will manipulate their customers and into taking on loans that they're going to be wildly unaffordable. There's an assumption here too from you that people are going to have perfect information and the expertise to be able to sort through all these issues that makes them vulnerable to being preyed upon by big banks or tech industry or big pharma, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't think I said any of that. I don't know where you got that, with all due respect. No, I didn't say the customers would automatically have perfect information. They'd be able to stand up to big pharma or big banks. I'm not presuming that there aren't large institutions and small institutions that would be perfectly comfortable manipulating their customers. And I'm not suggesting there isn't such a thing as corruption and fraud. All of that is absolutely true. I'm just pointing out that as much as you and I may agree, if you could let me agree with you, that a regulatory framework may be a good idea in certain situations, maybe many situations, that framework doesn't necessarily need to reside with an elected, democratically fostered institutional government. That those
but
dots
why do you
don't
think they'll
connect.
do it on their own? I don't understand that. Why do you think the industry will do it on their own? That seems totally ahistorical.
No, it's actually quite historical. Most standardization in the United States is handled in the private sector.
How is the safety of workers during, the Dickensian era when industry had more carte blanche? Did they regulate themselves and make sure there weren't kids in the sweatshops and people losing limbs every day? I mean, there seems like some basic safety metrics that they're going to cut corners on as much as they possibly can. Because again, and you didn't reckon with the core of my argument, which was that the reason you don't want industry boards providing this regulatory framework is because they have one interest, which is profit maximization, and society, as represented by the government, may have other interests and likely does have other interests separate and apart from the profit motive, which is why it's appropriate for the federal government or state government to house that regulatory and enforce that regulatory framework.
Hey, y'all, do me a favor.
Well, that was a snippet from this video, and obviously there's a lot more I could pull from. Oh, we're back. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the kind of arguments we're going to hear from Mike. That was actually a more civil discussion than the other ones I've watched with him, because he's definitely a tendency to interrupt and be kind of rude sometimes. But then constantly twisted on the other person. He'll be like, "Oh, you're not being fair towards me. What do you mean?" So just expect those kind of things.
No, yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
Oh no, I really appreciated her composure through that. I like to play this game in the grocery store called Patriarchy Chicken. And gentlemen, you are beautiful, but I just started noticing that, you know how you're coming around the corner in the grocery store and there are two people, they start to converge. It just seems like there's always this expectation of some genders to that, oh, you should yield to me. And I just, no, I will not anymore. You know what? You think I'm going to stop? I'm not. We're going to crash, pal. We're going to play Patriarchy Chicken. So if someone starts talking over me, I just keep going. We're going to crash. Yeah. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
He was really bad about that.
Yeah, I think men are kind of taught to have to compete with other men.
Yeah.
And they're always constantly like, I'm more masculine. My voice matters. I need to dominate this conversation. I need to dominate this and that. So they're kind of like turn off their their courtesy, and they're just like laser focused on whatever task at hand, not looking towards other people. So it's kind of like expecting entitlement, expecting people to move aside for you, which I'm very guilty of. I'm just going to be honest.
Oh, we would crash.
Yeah, we would crash. It would be fun.
Your eggs are going everywhere, dude.
No, I mean, Discord is great. And using tonality, I mean, it's all a part of argument. Your tone, how you address people, not so much the public crashing. I mean, that is inevitable because you can't see the person around the corner.
Yeah,
but
that's different.
Yeah, but you're right. It is harder when it comes to women and male perspective in debates because it becomes men. Sometimes their voice is dominating, and it's not very. It's like Trump. Trump's very loud, but he's not very logical.
Yeah. Not very. That's an understatement.
Yeah, but and that is a form of arguing. I'm not gonna sit there. It's not. It's a device using arguments to raise your voice to change the tonality of the argument. But it's I love, like you said, I love her demeanor, how she was able to stick to the issues, even though he was using fallacies to attack her argument, which was essentially attacking her instead of attacking the argument itself.
Yeah, it wasn't really representative of someone I would trust to represent me.
He's trying to represent the country.
Yeah. Let's stop.
There's definitely certain issues which like he could be certainly correct about.
Yeah.
And we didn't really delve into that, but on economics, there's probably zero issues. I would agree with that.
Economically,
yeah, like he's definitely like anti-war. He's hesitant towards authoritarianism. Blah 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 blah. Like there's a lot of issues. You probably agree with me on drug decriminalization. Like there's a lot of stuff which we would agree on, at least in comparison to a Republican. But in economics, it's kind of like it's so deontological. Their view of like being opposed to taxation or like any form of government, which I'm opposed to the idea of government, but like government exists and is going to continue to exist whether you like it or not. So it's like, how would you like the government to operate? Well, I'd prefer it to be more beneficial and benevolent towards people.
Yeah, I don't even think Republicans make that argument. That's what makes libertarians very unique, and their
Yeah.
former argument, because we Republicans would admit that some government is necessary. Like no
Yeah.
one can argue that government is not necessary. That's, I mean, you just wake up in the morning and look at your trash being picked up. That's government.
Right?
So
Yeah.
that's the very fundamental of government, but it is government. And so
It just makes it a little bit easier in certain ways. Like theoretically, we could have a private garbage man. That's fine. It's just more efficient to do it this way.
yeah,
But there's something you can't replace. Is like there are other states, there are other governments around the world, whether or not we like it or not.
Mhm.
And if we get rid of our governments, they are going to take over us.
Yeah.
So our military, which I don't approve of the way our military operates, but the existence of a military to defend
well,
the state from other states is an absolute necessity.
I don't think necessarily our military operates incorrectly. I think they're operating under the mandate of their leaders. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
which is the leaders are operating incorrectly.
yeah.
The troops are.
We definitely have a military industrial complex.
Yeah.
That's I think that's America's biggest strength and biggest weakness at the same time. It makes us strong
True.
because no one challenges us, but it makes us weak
Mhm.
because we don't use the resources correctly.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, we overspend, and we should be using those resources and diverting them to economic principles, education, COVID vaccines, health awareness, a whole bunch of social programs that can use the amount of money we spend in the military. It's
Yeah.
just inefficiency of how, especially now in this modern military. You've heard me talk about it too, Seth, where I think that the war of the next 50, 100 years is not going to be on a battlefield.
No.
It's
Yeah.
going to be on a computer.
Yeah.
And we don't, our government, our military is not even ready for that kind of war.
No.